And let's begin with epithelial tissue. We're looking at simple squamous epithelium. This is a very thin, flat tissue covering and lining organs such as the blood vessels, the alveoli, the respiratory membrane within the lungs where gas exchange takes place. It also forms the membranes of the peritoneum and the other serous membranes like the pericardium. It's very thin, very flat, which aids it well in transport mechanisms such as diffusion of gases and ions, osmosis of water across the membrane, as well as secretion and filtration. And the cells themselves, again, are very thin and flat, not very distinct, appearing more like a bold line here lining the Bowman's capsule. But we can occasionally see, as shown by these blue arrows, some of the nuclei that bulge up and out from the cell membrane, almost like the plump meat and cheese stuffing in a ravioli. Our next epithelial tissue is simple columnar epithelium. And again, simple is one layer of cells, and this is non-ciliated columnar. There's no cilia at the top. Those are microvilli that are membrane-like fingers, microscopic structures to aid in absorption and secretion. But the columnar cells are very long, much longer than they are wider, column-like, rectangular-like, and they typically have a large nucleus that's found commonly near the base of the cell. We can find simple columnar epithelium lining the entire GI tract from the stomach through the intestines, where it's functioning in absorption of nutrients and secretion of digestive enzymes. We can also find it forming the ducts of various glands within the body. Our next tissue is simple cuboidal epithelium. It's simple one layer of cuboidal cells, in this case wrapped to form a tube. The cells themselves, cuboidal, now they're not boxes, they're not cubes per se, but they're very short and kind of squarish. They're kind of like pegs, but they're more short and squat than they are long and narrow like the columnar cells. They share the same function as the columnar epithelial cells in secretion and absorption, and location-wise, as we see here, they're commonly found within ducts, as in the ducts of the kidney tubules. They're also found in ducts that are leading away from other glands, such as the pancreas, and they're also found in some cases as a secretory layer, producing hormones, as in the thyroid gland. Our next epithelial tissue is pseudostratified columnar epithelium, and this is a single layer of columnar epithelial cells. Now it looks like it's stratified. It looks like all these nuclei of different cells are found in many layers stacked one on top of the other, but they're not. In actuality, all of the cells make contact with this basement membrane found below the epithelium. So we see columnar cells looking like the simple columnar epithelium, very long, column-like. We have these tufts of cilia found at the surface. And location-wise, we typically see this tissue lining the respiratory tract. We see it courtesy of the cilia functioning in filtering of debris, as well as generating mucus in a secretion that helps to catch all that debris, and the cilia sweep it up out of the respiratory tract before it damages the more delicate gas exchange membranes below. Finishing up the epithelial tissue, let's begin with stratified squamous epithelium. Now we know simple epithelial tissue is one cell layer thick. Stratified epithelium is many layers thick. Strata means layers. and we see the very flat layers of our squamous epithelial tissue covering surfaces lining the interior of cavities. We see this as a very strong physical protecting epithelial tissue, where it's found lining the entire inner mouth, the oral cavity, tongue, the pharynx, and the food tube, the esophagus. All the physical friction of food moving through would damage and irritate very thin epithelial linings, but not so with the stratified tissue. We also find stratified squamous epithelium on the epidermis of the skin, the outermost covering of the skin, providing tremendous physical protection. Here's another view of stratified squamous epithelium, but in this case found in thick skin, such as the palms of the hand and the soles of the feet, where we have many, many more layers of stratified squamous tissue offering even more tougher protection against friction. Our next epithelial tissue is transitional epithelium. And when you look at this tissue, it doesn't really have any one distinct shape like the others have. It sometimes looks, when it's stretched out, like squamous tissue, and when it's more relaxed, like we see here, it resembles more cuboidal cells. You know, we see the nucleus and kind of the roundish cell. But the cell shape is very transitional in form because of the function of this tissue. It's a very elastic tissue. It's lining the urinary bladder and portions of the urinary tract where it can distend, which means it can stretch out, and as the bladder fills up with urine, it can accommodate large volumes of fluid. And then after urination, the bladder is empty and the tissue can recoil back to its original shape. So the transitional nature suits this tissue shape really well. So when you look at these layers, it's not clear layering like we see in the stratified squamous tissue. These round cells, like bubbly bubble wrap cells, are kind of all just piled together haphazardly. And that's important for the flexibility of this tissue as it distends and stretches out. And that wraps it up for our epithelial tissue. The next screencast will feature the connective tissue. Thanks for watching. I hope this is helping you review and learn histology on connective tissue, primarily the loose connective tissues. And our first one that you're looking at here is areolar connective tissue. And the search image is fabric. It's almost like we're looking at a small piece of clothing underneath the microscope. We have these thick pink stained collagen proteins crisscrossing, interwoven together to provide tremendous strength and support that the areolar connective tissue is known for. There's also some reticular fibers. These branch. That's what reticular refers to, a branching spiderweb-like appearance, where this network of proteins helps hold these diverse protein fibers and the fibroblast cells and macrophages and other cells together within this whole environment. The white area is a semi-solid matrix, which is a ground substance that kind of binds all this material together. Also occasionally have some elastic fibers, and we see here some of these proteins. Sometimes they're like coils, and the elastic fibers provide the ability to distend, to stretch, as well as to retract and return back to the tissue's original shape. So it provides a lot of strong durability to this tissue. And we find it abundantly through the body. It's found surrounding vessels, surrounding organs, found within the body wall of organs in various layers. It's found within the skin, between the epidermis and the dermis, as well as from the dermis to the subcutaneous layer, helping to bind the adipose fat and the nerves and the sensory receptors of the skin and blood vessels together, acting as a passageway as well from the skin to the rest of the body. Our next loose connective tissue is adipose tissue, and it's made up of these bubble-like adipocytes. These are the fat cells, and they're storing triglyceride fat within their interior, and they can swell and swell to large sizes to accommodate increasing amounts of lipid, and they act as a major energy storage depot that can build up fat supplies but also release them to the body as needed. And adipose is an insulator. It surrounds many organs such as the heart, and it's found in the sub-Q layer underneath the skin, helping to maintain body temperature. Tremendous cushion and support as well, because it's a prominent tissue in many of the joints, helping to cushion from the hard impact of movement. The general appearance of the tissue is very open and porous, almost spongy. These very thin membranes of the adipose tissue don't give a whole lot of strength, but the main thing here is room, surface area to hold a lot of triglyceride fats. We can find it as well within bone. There's a region of the bone called the yellow bone marrow that provides an energy supply. Our final loose connective tissue is reticular connective tissue. And the search image here is roots, almost as if you're looking at soil and plant roots under the microscope, where, remember, reticular means branching, and these dark black or brown fibers are the tissue that provides tremendous support and structure to organs like the lymph nodes. It's also found in the liver, the red bone marrow, and the spleen. It provides a lot of room, a lot of surface area to hold the blood cells in those organs, to hold the white blood cells in the lymph nodes to help purify and filter the tissue fluid as it passes through. And let's focus on dense connective tissue. This is dense regular connective tissue. First thing you should ask when you see this under the microscope, where's the cells? Well, we can see the nuclei of our fibroblasts kind of squeezed in between what very little space there is between these dense collagen bundles. Remember, this is dense connective tissue, so there is not a whole lot of room. It's the direction of the collagen protein bundles. We're running in the same parallel direction. We're not crisscrossing. We're not overlapping. We're running parallel. That's what regular is referring to in the terminology. So you're not seeing cell membranes. Like smooth muscle for some looks kind of like this, but you're not seeing individual long, skinny, tapered, needle-like cells like you do in smooth muscle. Our next dense tissue is dense irregular connective tissue. So it's dense. Where's the white space? Don't see a whole lot of it around here. Where are the cells? Well, there's some stained, but there's not a whole lot of cells here to look at. Similar to dense regular connective tissue, instead we see an abundance of tightly packed collagen bundles. But here, the bundles are moving in all directions. That's where the word irregular comes from in our terminology. In irregular, diverse directions. So this tissue is interwoven together, these tough bundles of collagen fibers. So strength is a huge function of this tissue. We find it commonly wrapping around organs like the muscle. It's found as well within the skin and the thick dermis of the skin. It's also found as protective coverings around cartilage and bone in the perichondrium and periosteum, respectively. And it plays a role in joints as well, playing a supporting function in the joint capsule. So strength and support are huge benefits of having a lot of this dense regular tissue around the body. Our last dense connective tissue is elastic connective tissue. And the search image to look for are these springy coils that we can see scattered around in these various bundles. They're wavy, some are kind of corkscrew shape. A spiral appearance is a definite search image you want to look for. And they're running parallel to each other. You don't see them overlapping. They're all running in the same direction here within these bands. And like its name suggests, elastic connective tissue provides elasticity, which means the tissue can extend out to accommodate a larger volume, and it can retract back to the original shape. So it helps maintain the shape of organs like blood vessels, for example. The elastic arteries have to regulate blood pressure with the help of this elastic connective tissue. It's also in the lung and the airways to accommodate respiration on connective tissue. And we're going to focus on cartilage. This is hyaline cartilage. And like other connective tissues, we see cells embedded within a matrix or ground substance that includes some acellular components like protein and water, salts, acids, etc. And hyaline cartilage being the main joint cartilage to offer protection, support, cushioning, lubrication, providing a very friction-free surface for the ends of the long bones to move against in the joint. This cartilage has a thicker jelly-like matrix, and that's the bluish, whitish regions here where we see the chondrocytes in the reddish stain scattered pretty evenly. It's an even distribution of chondrocyte cells to matrix. That's one of the key features to look for when you're deciding what type of cartilage you have. It is the quantity of matrix relative to the distribution of the chondrocyte cells. And you notice the cells are found in little chambers. You see some of the white spaces. Those little chambers, they're kind of like little mini Swiss cheese holes, or kind of like the pores in a sponge. Those chambers holding the cells are called lacunae, and they're little pockets within this jelly-like matrix where the cells can survive and thrive and carry out some maintenance of this tissue. And we find hyaline cartilage as the major joint cartilage on the ends of the long bones, as well as around the trachea and the larynx, the voice box, in addition to the embryonic and fetal skeletons. This cartilage is fibrocartilage, and this is one of the extremes. If hyaline is kind of the middle of the road, average cartilage, this is one of the extremes. What we see here is a very far dispersed set of chondrocytes, where the cartilage cells have a lot of space between them. They have a lot of matrix between them. That's one of the big search images to look for. There in their lacunae, we can see some of the white regions there that are helping to support the chondrocyte cells. But look at the matrix. It's very dense. It almost looks like dense irregular connective tissue in a way, but that tissue does not have these larger chondrocytes and these very prominent lacunae spaces. Remember, we couldn't see a whole lot of cellular detail at all in the dense irregular connective tissue. Well, you can see the fibers, how kind of stringy, especially here where it's a little lighter, how stringy and fibrous this cartilage is. And this is tough. If we're looking at gel as a matrix for the hyaline, this is more like hardened rubber, like in a hockey puck or in a car tire. It's really tough and strong, able to endure lots of stress and strain. This is the primary cartilage in between the vertebrae, forming the vertebral discs, as well as the pubic symphysis, the pad of fibrocartilage between the pubic bone. And this is our final cartilage. This is elastic cartilage. Notice the matrix chondrocyte ratio. We don't have much matrix here at all. It's very thin. The lacunae are very close together. The large chondrocyte cells within them are just crammed together. Very little matrix. This is the other extreme from the fibrocartilage. This is found in the larynx, forming the epiglottis, covering the superior portion of the voice box, as well as the outer ear. It's very thin, provides support, and maintains the shape of structures. In this podcast, I'm going to review muscle tissue histology, including skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscle. Our first muscle tissue is skeletal muscle. This muscle tissue carries out voluntary muscle contraction, which means that it's under conscious control, which functions in movement, helps maintain posture and balance, protection, as well as heat production through its contraction. Skeletal muscle is found in all of the major muscles of the body, where it's attached to the bones of the skeleton by tendons. The long red cells that I drew represent the long muscle cells, also called the muscle fibers. One search image to keep in mind is that the muscle fibers are all parallel to each other, which means they're all running in the same direction. These long tube-like cells also contain alternating light-dark bands called striations, and I'm drawing these now in each of the muscle fibers. These striations represent the dense concentrations of proteins, including actin and myosin, that allow muscle tissue to contract, as well as other proteins that help support the tissue. A unique trait of skeletal muscle tissue is the presence of multiple nuclei per cell, and I'm drawing these now in each of the fibers. And one search image to keep in mind is their location at the peripheral edge of the cell membrane. They can be found either at the top or the bottom throughout the muscle fiber. Here's a micrograph of skeletal muscle tissue, and you can see the parallel fibers, the dense concentration of striations, and the peripheral nuclei. Our next tissue is cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle tissue is only located in the heart wall. It carries out involuntary contraction, which is not under conscious control, and it's helping to pump blood throughout the entire body through the blood vessels. Like skeletal muscle tissue, cardiac muscle consists of tube-like cells called fibers, but rather than arranged parallel to each other, they're found in a branching or forking pattern. Another difference from skeletal muscle tissue is the presence of one nucleus per cardiac muscle fiber, and these nuclei are oval or rounded in shape and generally are located in the center of the fiber. Like skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle tissue is also striated, and I'm drawing the fine striated lines representing those muscle proteins throughout the fibers. In this photo of cardiac muscle tissue, you can see the branching nature of the fibers, the presence of striations, as well as the central location of the nuclei in each of the fibers. A unique feature of cardiac muscle tissue is that the fibers are connected to each other by thick cellular junctions called intercalated discs. I'm drawing them here as darker, bolder bands compared to the rest of the striations. These intercellular connections are similar to how two jigsaw puzzle pieces are joined together. These cellular joints make cardiac muscle very strong, and they hold the fibers strongly together during their intense contractions. In this micrograph of cardiac muscle, you can see the dark, bold vertical lines indicating the intercalated discs. Our final muscle tissue is smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is involuntary muscle, which, like cardiac muscle, is not under conscious control. Smooth muscle is found in sheets, where the skinny individual smooth muscle cells are stacked on top of each other. Each individual cell is tapered at the ends and thicker in the middle, where the nucleus is found. It's similar to a stretched out ravioli in appearance. The cells are arranged in a staggered pattern, similar to the arrangement of bricks in a wall. Smooth muscle is found in the walls of the hollow organs like the stomach and the intestines, as well as the walls of the artery and bladder, airways like the trachea, the gallbladder, the uterus, and the muscles in the iris and ciliary body of the eye. Smooth muscle tissue functions in movement, such as constriction of the blood vessels and the airways, moving food through the digestive tract, or contraction of the urinary bladder and the gallbladder. Another big difference compared to skeletal and cardiac muscles is the lack of striations in these individual smooth muscle cells. The smooth name of the tissue is from the lack of these protein bands. In this micrograph of smooth muscle tissue, you can see the stacked, staggered layering of these individual cells. You can observe the skinny appearance of these cells, how they are running parallel to each other in these dense bands. Another characteristic of smooth muscle tissue is the appearance of one nucleus per cell. Under the microscope, the nuclei often appear stretched out, almost cigar-shaped. And that concludes our tour of muscle tissue histology. I hope this podcast has helped you in your understanding of muscle tissue, and good luck on your lab practicals and exams. See you next time. Thanks for watching.